Santi. Lieutenant threw his canine German Shepherd off a building. What happened next will move you to tears. He was more than just a dog. He was a hero. A canine German Shepherd trained to protect, serve, and stand by his handler through the most dangerous missions. For years, he saved lives, uncovered hidden threats, and earned the undying respect of every officer who served beside him. But when his time in service came to an end, the one person he trusted most, the man he considered family, did the unthinkable. A retired lieutenant, once praised for his discipline and leadership, tossed the very dog who had protected him off the rooftop of a city apartment building. No warning, no mercy, just silence. Then a fall that should have ended everything. But what happened next defied all odds and will forever change the way you see loyalty, survival, and second chances. This is the story of a warrior who was betrayed, and what he did after will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That helps us bring you more emotional and inspiring stories like this one, where courage rises even in the darkest moments. The scream that came from the alleyway was sharp, broken, almost human. A woman crossing the street dropped her grocery bags. A boy on a bicycle slammed on his brakes. Everyone looked up. The German Shepherd had already fallen. It was a gray January afternoon in downtown St. Louis. The wind was bitter, and most people were hurrying to get indoors. But at 4:26 p.m., something horrifying broke the rhythm of the city. A canine German Shepherd, massive, black and tan, still wearing his faded military service harness, plummeted from the top of a 6-story apartment building. He hit the ground with a thud no one could forget. But what shocked everyone was that he didn't die. He moved. Barely. His body twisted in agony, his front leg bent at a wrong angle, blood pooling under his side. His ribs heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. He let out one soft whimper, then went silent. By the time first responders arrived, the crowd had already gathered. One woman cried openly. A man knelt beside the dog, his hands trembling as he tried to comfort him without causing more pain. The dog's name was Ghost. And less than 6 minutes earlier, he had been standing beside the man he trusted most, retired Lieutenant Frank Harlan. Frank had once been decorated, a respected canine handler in the Army. He'd served 3 tours overseas with Ghost. The two had saved dozens of lives. Ghost had taken shrapnel to the shoulder to shield a squad of Marines. He was a hero. And Frank had once loved him for it. But things had changed after the discharge. Frank never adjusted to civilian life. The medals on the wall didn't pay the bills. The PTSD grew worse. The drinking started. He isolated himself from everyone, including Ghost. Neighbors said they used to hear shouting through the walls. Thumps, crashes, sometimes growls. Nobody wanted to believe it, but one man finally called animal services after seeing bruises on Ghost's side. That man was Ethan Reed, a 27-year-old EMT who lived in the same building. He'd often seen Ghost tied to the stair railings for hours without food or water. But no one expected Frank to do this. Not after all they'd been through. Ethan was one of the first to reach the dog's side. He dropped to his knees, his uniform still stained from another emergency call. "Stay with me," he whispered. Ghost's eyes were still open, but fading. Ethan placed a hand gently over the dog's chest. It was so faint, he thought it had stopped. But then Ghost blinked. "He's alive!" Ethan shouted. "Get the stretcher! Now!" At the veterinary trauma center across town, Dr. Maya Leland had just finished surgery on a Labrador with a fractured pelvis when the call came in. German Shepherd, K9, fell from 6 stories, still breathing, en route now. She froze for a second. A fall like that? It didn't make sense. He should have died instantly. She grabbed gloves, scrubbed in it again, and shouted to prep OR2. 10 minutes later, Ghost was wheeled in, bloodied, trembling, his breathing ragged. His harness was still on, its faded patch reading, "Property of U.S. military." Ghost! Maya's heart cracked. She recognized the name. He wasn't just a dog, he was a legend. Ethan stayed outside the glass, pacing, fists clenched. He couldn't shake the image of Ghost falling, his body spinning in the air like a discarded object. No hesitation, no fight, just trust, betrayed in the worst way. He pulled out his phone, went to the local animal welfare page, and hit record. "My name is Ethan Reed. I'm an EMT, and today I saw something I can never forget." A retired military canine was thrown off a building by his handler, his own handler. "This can't stay quiet. We have to speak up. For him." He posted the video. Within hours, it exploded online. But none of that mattered. Not yet. Because back inside OR2, as machines beeped and hands moved fast, Dr. Maya pressed her fingers to the edge of Ghost's chest and whispered, "Come on, soldier. You've survived worse. Don't give up now." And in that moment, Ghost's paw twitched. He wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Ghost wasn't supposed to survive the first hour. That's what the trauma team quietly told themselves as they worked. The injuries were catastrophic: shattered front leg, multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, and a collapsed lung. But despite everything, his heart kept beating. Faint, yes, but steady. Dr. Maya Leland had treated war dogs before. She knew what their bodies could endure. But this case was different. This wasn't a combat injury. This was betrayal, the kind that left more than physical wounds. "He's not letting go," one of the vet techs said, her voice shaking as she placed a warm compress over Ghost's chest. "No," Maya said, her hands moving quickly over the broken ribs. "He's trained to hold the line. He doesn't know how to quit." Outside the OR, Ethan sat in the waiting room, legs bouncing restlessly. His EMT jacket was still on, stained with Ghost's blood. Every few minutes, he glanced at the hallway, hoping to see someone, anyone, come through those doors with news. He'd seen trauma before, accidents, violence, but nothing like this. Nothing like a decorated canine tossed away like trash by the very man he would have died for. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. How still Ghost had been. How his eyes didn't close. As if he was waiting for permission to stay alive. On his phone, the video he posted just 3 hours ago had already reached over 300,000 views. Comments were flooding in. How could someone do that to a war hero? This dog gave everything for this country. Find that monster. Name and shame the handler. The public was angry, and they had every right to be. It didn't take long for reporters to show up outside the trauma center. News vans, cameras, microphones. But Ethan wasn't interested in attention. He just wanted justice. Frank Harlan, the retired lieutenant, had vanished. Police had been dispatched to his apartment after a witness report confirmed what Ethan had seen, that Frank had been on the rooftop with Ghost moments before the fall. But the apartment was empty. No car, no weapon, just an open beer bottle on the counter and a service medal still hanging on the wall. He left without a trace. Back in OR2, the worst of the surgery was over. Ghost had made it through the first 4 hours. Maya stitched carefully around his chest wound, lowering her voice to a whisper no one else could hear. "You're safe now," she said. "Whatever happened up there, it's not the end of your story." Ghost's body trembled slightly, and for the first time, a faint sigh escaped his muzzle. His vitals, though weak, were stabilizing. Later that night, as the medical staff dimmed the lights and covered Ghost with a warm blanket, Maya stepped into the waiting area. Ethan stood up immediately. "Well?" he asked, barely breathing. Maya nodded. "He made it. He's not out of the woods, but he's alive. He's fighting." Ethan dropped into the chair behind him, his hand over his mouth, eyes brimming with emotion. "I thought he was gone. He's strong," Maya said softly. "Stronger than I've ever seen." Ethan looked up. "Can I see him?" "Not tonight, but soon. He's in recovery. He'll need time, and someone who's patient." Ethan hesitated. "If he makes it, and no one claims him?" Maya met his eyes. "You want to take him. I don't want him going back into the system," Ethan said. "Not after what he's been through." "We'll cross that bridge when we get there," Maya replied. "For now, just hope." Ethan nodded, but his mind was already made up. Outside the clinic, the crowd had doubled. A few protesters had gathered holding handmade signs. "Justice for Ghost." "Military dogs deserve better." "Find Frank Harlan." The story had spread far beyond St. Louis now. Inside, in a quiet, sterile room, Ghost slept under careful watch. Tubes ran from his leg. His chest rose and fell slowly. The pain was still there, but so was something else. The faint memory of a kind hand, a gentle voice, and a promise whispered through the chaos. A promise to live. But far across the city, in a rundown motel room with the curtains drawn on, Frank Harlan sat alone, staring at a bottle in one hand, and Ghost's old dog tag in the other. His eyes were sunken, his mind racing, and in his silence, one question echoed louder than the rest. What if Ghost survived? The first 48 hours were critical. Ghost remained in a fragile state, breathing shallow, movement minimal, eyes glazed in and out of consciousness. Every beep of the monitor sent a ripple of tension through the veterinary trauma team. Dr. Maya Leland rarely left the room. She monitored every drop in his IV, adjusted his oxygen, and whispered encouragement as if he could hear her. "Come on, soldier," she'd say softly, brushing her gloved hand over his ears. "You've come too far to stop now." Outside, the world was watching. The video Ethan posted had gone viral across the country. News outlets picked it up. Animal rights groups launched hashtags. Within a week, #Justice for Ghost trended on social media. A GoFundMe campaign to support Ghost's medical costs surpassed $50,000 in 2 days. But more than that, thousands of people began sharing their own stories of canine dogs, of bravery, sacrifice, and heartbreak. But through all the noise, Ghost remained still, broken, quiet, until the third night. Ethan had come by after his EMT shift, still in uniform. Maya allowed him 10 minutes at Ghost's side. He stepped quietly into the recovery room, heart in his throat, and lowered himself onto the floor next to the sleeping shepherd. "Hey," he whispered. "I don't know if you remember me, but I was there. When you fell, when you didn't give up." Ghost's ears didn't twitch. His eyes remained shut. Ethan took a deep breath. "You're not just a story on the internet. You're not a hashtag. You're a warrior, and you deserve to feel safe again." And just as he was about to stand, Ghost's tail moved, just a little. Ethan froze. "Ghost?" The tail thumped again. One slow tap against the blanket. He called for Mia. She rushed in, scanned his vitals, then looked up in disbelief. "He's responding to your voice." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. By morning, Ghost opened his eyes. From there, recovery began in slow, painful steps. A special harness was built to support his damaged front leg. Hydrotherapy was introduced to help his muscles. He winced with every movement, whimpered during some nights, but the spark in his eyes grew brighter with each passing day. Still, the emotional wounds lingered. Ghost flinched at sudden noises. He refused to eat unless Ethan or Maya were nearby. And once, when a male vet tech raised his hand too fast to adjust the monitor, Ghost growled low. Not out of aggression, but fear. "He's got trauma," Maya explained to Ethan. "The kind we can't bandage." "I've seen it in veterans," Ethan said. "You can survive the war and still carry it everywhere." One afternoon, as Ghost slowly limped across the rehab mat, Ethan knelt beside him and whispered, "We're going to get through this, together." And in that moment, Ghost leaned his head into Ethan's chest. It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. But a trouble was brewing. Frank Harlan had resurfaced. A security camera caught him withdrawing money from an ATM in a gas station near the Missouri border. The footage was grainy, but his face was unmistakable. Law enforcement had issued a warrant for animal cruelty and endangerment. But he was still out there, and now he knew Ghost had survived. Late one night, Maya got a call from the clinic's front desk. A man had called, asking if the military dog was still alive. He didn't give his name, but the voice was low, gravelly, and it sent a chill through her. She immediately called Ethan. "He knows," she said. Ethan's voice hardened. "Let him come. Ghost's not alone anymore." Outside the trauma center, volunteers began setting up candles and photos of Ghost. Strangers came every day, leaving thank you letters, stuffed animals, and small dog toys by the window. But inside, Ghost's journey wasn't over. He was learning how to walk again, how to trust again. And deep inside, something else stirred. A memory of a rooftop, the weight of betrayal, and the quiet realization that this time, he'd have someone willing to fight for him. But just as Ghost took his first full step without assistance, a shadow moved past the clinic's surveillance camera, tall, slow, watching from across the street. It was Frank. And he wasn't there to say sorry. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The moment Mia told him about the strange call to the clinic, his instincts kicked in. The kind honed from years of responding to crises, of sensing when something just wasn't right. He knew Frank Harlan. He'd seen the look in his eyes before the fall. Cold, detached, not drunk, broken, and dangerous. He stayed at the clinic past visiting hours that night, pacing outside Ghost's recovery room. He made sure the doors were locked, the cameras working, and every staff member knew to call security if anything felt off. But the next morning, when he checked the security footage, his heart sank. At 3:47 a.m., a tall figure had appeared across the street from the clinic, standing still for nearly 7 minutes, just watching. The streetlight was dim, but Ethan recognized the outline. The hunched shoulders, the way he held his arm like it still carried a weapon. It was Frank. He didn't approach the building. He didn't speak. He just watched. And then he disappeared into the dark. Ethan showed the footage to Mia that morning. She stiffened, then whispered, "Why would he come back?" "Because he thought Ghost was dead," Ethan said, jaw clenched. "Now he knows the truth." Maya shook her head. "Do you think he wants to hurt him again?" "I think he wants to erase the mistake," Ethan replied. "And he's not done." They filed a report with local police immediately. A patrol car was assigned to pass by the clinic twice per shift. It wasn't enough. Ethan knew that better than anyone. The only way to truly protect Ghost was to get him out of there. He met with Maya later that evening. "I want to take him," Ethan said. "Home. I live in a quiet neighborhood, and I've already cleared it with my landlord. He can recover there, safely." Maya hesitated. "It's risky. He's still healing." "I'll handle it. I've got experience, and I won't leave him alone for a second." She studied Ethan's face for a long time, then looked toward the window where Ghost was resting, his eyes slowly following the movement of a nurse walking past. That spark had returned, the same one she had seen in battle-worn soldiers when they finally realized someone cared enough to fight for them. "All right," she said softly, "but I want updates, daily." "You'll get them," Ethan promised. That night, Ghost was transferred to Ethan's small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. He laid out a thick memory foam dog bed in the living room, covered it in clean blankets, and kept a bowl of fresh water nearby. Ghost limped in slowly, sniffed the air, and circled 3 times before lying down with a long, tired sigh. Ethan sat on the floor next to him. "No more cages," he whispered. "You're home now." Over the next few days, Ghost's healing accelerated. With Ethan's constant presence, he ate more, slept deeper, responded faster. He began standing on all 4 legs for a few seconds at a time. Every time he succeeded, Ethan would smile and say the same thing: "You're still a warrior." But safety was a fragile illusion. On the 6th night, while Ethan was brushing his teeth, Ghost began growling low, deep and guttural. Ethan rushed to the window and looked outside. Nothing. He scanned the street, the parked cars, the alleyway beside the building. Then he saw it. A boot print in the garden bed near the side entrance. Fresh, big, out of place. He grabbed his phone and turned off the lights. He crouched beside Ghost, gently stroking his back. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you." Ghost's growl faded, but his eyes never left the window. The next morning, Ethan found a note taped to his mailbox. "You should have let him die." No name, no signature. But Ethan didn't need one. He marched straight into the police station, note in hand. "He's escalating," he told the officer, "and I won't wait until he tries something worse." But getting a restraining order wasn't easy. Frank hadn't been arrested yet. He hadn't committed another crime, not officially. All Ethan could do was wait and watch. That night, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Ghost curled up beside Ethan's couch, resting his head on his front paws. Ethan sat close, one hand on the dog's thick neck. "Let him come," he said quietly. "We're not afraid." But across town, in a rented car parked 2 blocks away, Frank Harlan stared at Ethan's building through binoculars. His eyes were bloodshot. His hand was on the door handle. And this time, he wasn't just watching. The storm rolled in fast. Thunder echoed through the night like distant artillery, and the wind howled against the windows of Ethan's apartment. Inside, everything was still. Too still. Ghost lay near the couch, his head up, eyes fixed on the door. He hadn't growled, but his body was rigid, alert. Ethan noticed it too. He'd grown used to reading Ghost's signals, the slight twitch of an ear, the pause in his breath, the way his tail lowered when something didn't feel right. He reached under the couch cushion and pulled out the small pistol he kept for emergencies. Not that he ever wanted to use it. He was a medic, not a fighter. But tonight, he had a feeling he might need it. Ghost slowly got to his feet, favoring his healing leg but refusing to sit back down. He stood at the front door, nostrils flaring, ears straight. That's when Ethan heard it. The doorknob, turning. Not rattling, not forced. Turning. He flicked off the light. The door opened 1 inch, then 2. "Back up," Ethan whispered to Ghost, stepping forward quietly. But the moment the door creaked open wide enough to reveal the figure on the other side, soaking wet, unshaven, and breathing heavily, Ghost lunged. With a broken snarl, Ghost threw all his weight into the man's legs, knocking him halfway into the hallway. Frank hit the floor with a grunt, his arm scraping the wall. The flashlight he was holding skidded across the tile. "Ghost, down!" Ethan shouted, trying to restrain him. But Ghost didn't bite. He stood over Frank, chest heaving, teeth bared, frozen. As if waiting for a command he no longer trusted. Frank groaned, coughing. His voice was hoarse. "Call him off." Ethan stepped forward, the gun in his hand, though he kept it lowered. "You've got 5 seconds to get out of here before I make this official." Frank looked up at Ghost. There was something in his eyes. Not fear, not exactly. Shame? Guilt? Maybe both, but also something darker. "I came to get what's mine," he said bitterly. "He was my dog." "No," Ethan snapped. "He was your responsibility. And you threw him off a building." Frank sat up against the wall, breathing hard. "You don't understand. He was turning on me. The nightmares, the sounds. He wouldn't stop barking. I couldn't think." "You mean he reminded you of what you did over there?" Ethan cut in. "Of everything you never processed? You took it out on him." Frank looked away. "I gave my life to that war," he muttered. "And what did I get in return? A broken mind and a dog that stared at me like I was a monster." "Maybe he saw something you were trying to ignore," Ethan said. "But he still loved you. Until the second you let go." The silence between them was heavy. Ghost stepped back, slowly limping slightly as he returned to Ethan's side. Ethan's voice dropped low. "You're not taking him. Not now. Not ever." Frank stood. "He's a government dog. I was his handler. You forfeited that the moment you tried to kill him." Frank's hands clenched into fists. "You think you're better than me? Some paramedic playing hero?" "I don't need to be better," Ethan said. "I just need to keep him safe." Frank's lip curled. "You're not the only one with nightmares, Reed." And then, fast, he lunged toward Ghost. But this time, Ghost didn't hesitate. He growled, loud and commanding, and took a protective stance between Ethan and Frank. His eyes burned with fire. Not rage, but something primal. Justice. As Frank stumbled back, startled by the force of it, Ethan raised the pistol. "Leave. Now." Frank froze. Then finally stepped back into the hall. He didn't say a word. He turned, soaked from rain and sweat, and vanished down the stairs into the darkness. Ethan locked the door. Ghost stood there for a moment longer, still alert, then slowly lowered himself back onto the floor. Ethan sat beside him, heart pounding. "You saved both of us tonight," he said quietly. Ghost didn't wag his tail, but his eyes met Ethan's, steady, strong. He had chosen, and this time it wasn't out of duty, it was out of love. The days that followed the confrontation were quiet, peaceful almost. No more shadows, no more threats, no more knocks at the door in the middle of the night. Frank Harlan had disappeared again, this time for good. The police were still looking for him, and Ethan filed a full report. But deep down, he didn't expect Frank to return. Not after facing Ghost and realizing that the dog he once broke had found something stronger than fear. Freedom. In the safety of Ethan's home, Ghost changed. The growls faded. The nightmares grew less frequent. He no longer cowered at every loud noise or flinched at sudden movement. His limp improved with every rehab session, and for the first time since that awful fall, he began wagging his tail again, slow, deliberate, but real. Ethan took time off from work to stay home and focus on Ghost. The two settled into a rhythm. Morning walks, afternoon naps, training games that helped rebuild Ghost's coordination and confidence. It wasn't just therapy for the dog. It was healing for Ethan too. They were two souls who had seen too much, and now they were learning how to breathe again. The story continued to spread. Local news followed up with an interview, And soon Ethan and Ghost were invited to speak at a community event honoring service animals. At first, Ethan hesitated. "We're not ready for the spotlight," he told Maya over the phone. But Maya gently pushed him. "It's not about the spotlight. It's about showing what survival looks like, what loyalty means." So they went. The event was held in a local park. Families gathered on blankets. Veterans in uniform sat in folding chairs. Children waved little flags. And when Ethan stepped up to the microphone, Ghost at his side, there was silence. Ethan cleared his throat. "This dog," he began, voice steady, "was trained for war. He served this country. He saved lives. But what he didn't expect was to come home and be betrayed by the person he trusted most. Some would say that should have broken him." He looked down at Ghost. But it didn't. Because inside this dog is something that can't be taught. Something stronger than commands or instincts. It's called heart. The crowd erupted in applause. Ghost stood tall beside him, ears up, tail slowly wagging. After the speech, dozens of people approached to thank them. Veterans knelt to pet Ghost. Kids gave him little treats. Someone slipped a medal around his neck, not an official military award, but a handcrafted emblem that read, "Forever loyal, forever loved." Back at home that night, Ethan sat on the floor beside Ghost and smiled. "You did good today, buddy." Ghost rested his head on Ethan's knee, and for the first time, he closed his eyes not in pain, but in peace. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from the National K9 Veterans Foundation. Inside was a formal offer. They wanted to feature Ghost as the face of their upcoming awareness campaign to help raise funding for retired canines who, like him, had been discarded after service. Ethan stared at the letter for a long time. He knew Ghost wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a symbol, a reminder that scars don't define you. It's what you do after the pain that matters. He gently placed the letter beside Ghost's bed and whispered, "It's your choice. But if you're ready, the world needs to see what strength looks like." Ghost looked up. No bark, no sound, just a slow thump of the tail and a soft nudge of his muzzle against Ethan's hand. They were ready. But what neither of them knew, not yet, was that the journey wasn't entirely over. Because someone had been watching from a distance. A figure in a worn coat stood at the edge of the park that day, hidden in the crowd. A man who had seen the speech, the medal, the standing ovation. And though his face was lined with shame and regret, he wasn't done watching. He was done hiding. Frank Harlan was ready to speak. The morning sun poured through the windows of Ethan's apartment, casting soft golden light over the hardwood floor. Ghost lay on his side, his breathing calm and steady. He was stronger now. His legs still bore the scar, and his gait still had a limp. But the weight he carried was no longer just physical. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter pouring fresh coffee when there was a knock at the door. Not a loud one. Gentle. Hesitant. Ethan placed the mug down slowly and approached. Ghost had already risen, ears tilted slightly forward. He didn't growl, but his body was alert, watching. Ethan opened the door. Frank Harlan stood there, hat in hand. He looked older, much older than just a few months ago. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken but no longer cold. There was something in them that hadn't been there before, something Ethan couldn't quite name. Regret. "Can I come in?" Frank asked softly. Ethan didn't see. "Why?" Frank looked past him. To Ghost. "Because I need to say goodbye." Ethan hesitated, then stepped aside. Frank walked in slowly, every step unsure. When his eyes met Ghost's, he froze. Ghost stared back. No growl, no bark. Just stillness. "I didn't come to make excuses," Frank said, voice rough. "There aren't any. I did the unforgivable. I broke the trust of the one soul who never failed me." He knelt carefully about 3 feet from Ghost. He didn't reach for him, didn't push. He bowed his head. I know you probably don't understand the words, boy, but I also know you understand what I'm feeling, because you always did. His voice cracked. I was a coward. I was broken, and I punished you for what I couldn't face in myself. A long silence. Then, finally, Frank reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small round object. Ghost's old military badge. It was scratched, faded around the edges, but unmistakable. Frank placed it gently on the floor and pushed it forward. I took this off you when I thought we were done, he said. But we weren't. You still had fight in you. You still had purpose. Ghost stared at the badge. Slowly, his front paw moved forward and rested beside it. Ethan watched in silence, heart pounding. Frank took a shaky breath. They say dogs don't hold grudges, he whispered. I hope that's true. Ghost stepped forward, 2 slow paces. He sniffed the badge, then Frank's hand, then, carefully, gently. He rested his head on Frank's knee. It was only for a second, but it was everything. Frank's shoulders shook. His hand hovered for a moment. Then, with Ethan's quiet nod, he touched Ghost's neck. Thank you, he whispered, for saving me again, even when I didn't deserve it. They stayed there for a long moment. Then Ghost turned and walked back to Ethan, settling by his side. Frank stood. His eyes glistened. I'll turn myself in, he said. It's time I faced the rest of what I ran from. Ethan nodded. It's the right thing. Frank placed the hat back on his head, turned to Ghost one last time, and said the words he hadn't spoken in over a year. At ease, soldier. Ghost's tail gave a slow, steady waggy, and Frank walked out the door. 2 weeks later, Ghost was officially recognized at the National K-9 Veterans Ceremony in Washington, D.C. With Ethan at his side, he received the Loyalty Beyond Duty Medal, honoring not only his service, but his survival. Ethan stepped to the podium once more. We talk a lot about heroes, about bravery and courage, but sometimes the most powerful form of courage is healing, choosing to trust again, to love again. He looked down at Ghost. This dog was thrown away, but he rose, and in doing so, he lifted all of us. The crowd stood. Applause thundered through the memorial garden. Back home, Ghost returned to a life of peace. Walks, sunlight, a warm bed, and the steady presence of the man who never gave up on him. The nightmares never fully left, but neither did the strength, because he wasn't just a survivor. He was a warrior, and his mission now was simply to be loved. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, because sometimes the strongest souls walk on 4 legs and carry the greatest lessons in silence.